Remember exam season? That time of the year when neither the student was looking forward to attending an exam nor the teacher was looking forward to doing all those evaluations. Well, there's a corporate version of the examination, and that's called the performance review. Performance review system has been the backbone of aligning workforce to the shared objectives of the company. Why does this process evoke such mixed feelings? Is it something that has sort of stayed stuck in time? Has it evolved? Is it ready for modern times? Let's close the loop on this. Joining me today on Close the Loop is Manmeet Sandhu, the Chief People Officer of PhonePe. Manmeet, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah. So do you like performance reviews, Manmeet? Do you look forward to performance review season?
Well, I do not. Yes, I'm part of that vast majority of people who do not enjoy them. And I will say that I have had an interesting life where I've never actually had to work very hard towards a performance review.
You've always been ACES.
Well, it's never been a big part of my life for whatever reason, except to kind of run the process.
Yeah. So what makes it like, of course, you've been in the industry for such a long time and you've probably seen many versions of this process. Every company has a slightly different version of pretty much the same process. What makes it so difficult for an employee to even look forward to, or even a manager to look forward to?
Yeah, I think it's like you said, you're being evaluated. And the interesting thing is that as an employee, I'm being evaluated. But as a manager, I also have to get prepared for a difficult conversation, because regardless of how much effort I put into it, nobody's going to be happy. So it is a stressful time for everybody. And you just made me think about how come at personal level I have never felt this stress.
Yeah.
And I realized that, yes, not always, but for the vast majority of my life, I have had a relationship with my manager where I have had a high degree of trust.
Right.
So I sort of felt that they are looking out for me, so maybe it doesn't need to be such a big thing. There was a time where I actually didn't even bother filling.
So you felt safe in that conversation?
I felt safe. I didn't even bother filling in the performance document.
Okay.
Because I was like, yeah, she knows what I've done. It's going to be fine.
And did that work out well for you?
It did actually.
Okay. You had the same manager for a long time?
That particular manager I had for a year, but it was probably one of the nicest time that I had in that particular organization. The other part of it was also this other manager. While again she used to put in a fair amount of effort, she used to put in a really nice document which used to make me feel like, oh, I'm such an amazing person.
Right.
I got a 5% hike. Who cares? I'm such an amazing person. So I think there are some of those things that go into it, that the extent to which the person having the conversation with you is able to make you feel safe, and the extent to which you trust that individual to do the right thing for you.
But when you imagine this kind of a review process across hundreds, thousands, lakhs of employees, ultimately it's been distilled down to this, I feel, a very strict protocol to say that, this is what you will be graded on, and therefore ultimately this is what you get at the end of the day. Do you think is there a way out of that? Like, do you feel like companies have to do that? And does that impact the actual quality of the review? A review is supposed to be like, it's not only telling you what you've done well or where you can improve, but it's supposed to ultimately help you get better. That part somehow is just missed out completely.
Yeah, and it is, a lot of these systems are designed for a factory environment,
right,
where I was being measured very precisely on how many widgets did I produce,
right,
how much over that limit did I go, and therefore how much money should I be earning. Mm-hmm. And I think as the roles, things that people are supposed to do on the jobs got more complex, we kind of stuck with that old model. But I think there is also the very real element of the company being there to be able to generate profit. Right. And for it to be able to generate profit, it needs to be able to manage its costs. Mm-hmm. And employee costs, payroll costs are a large part of whatever,
which is a very big part of any company.
Right. So then if I have to think through how do I make sure that money is going to the people who are creating the most value, then I have to have some sort of a bell curve, some sort of a ranking mechanism.
And therefore every employee has to fit into a slot.
So they have to. Yeah. So even if at the very minimum, I need to identify who my best people are, who are the ones who are not really pulling their weight, and then there's everybody else in between.
Do you think that system is relevant today in modern times?
So I think that's kind of that element of talking about in the industrial system. You still were working with with a scarcity mindset, that there are only so many resources, those can only translate into so many widgets, and therefore there is so much that I can capture.
Right.
But if I look at it from a growth, in fact, a growth environment perspective, where my resources are possibly infinite.
Correct.
If my resources are technology and it can go as far as the human mind can take it, then there is no limit to the growth, and therefore maybe I don't have to put in a constraint in terms of measuring people like this. Right. So I probably still need to do something in terms of identifying the ones who are really outstanding. But if the more I can get into a mode of saying, hey, you're safe, your job is safe, you're creating value, and let's just have a conversation about how you can do more. How can you be a better and fuller version of yourself?
Right.
You're getting what you need to get, so you're not worried about how you're going to pay your bills and how you're going to build your house and all of those things. That much is happening, but now it's about how do you become better.
A better employee. But I think somewhere the angle with which both manager and employee are approaching a review, like an employee always approaches it with, what am I going to get? And a manager is like, what am I going to give? So do you think that that's where the root cause of the friction lies? So even if you assume all these other constraints that need to be there, can this core conversation evolve into something new?
So that's, I guess, I feel really bad for the middle managers, because they are the ones kind of stuck. They don't have a lot of authority in terms of what the budgets are going to be and what the system is going to be. And yet they are the ones who are going to be having to manage the emotional labor of talking to.
I like that phrase, emotional labor.
So you're sitting over there having to have, 20 of these conversations, and every person's going to come in and say, why not more? And so you get into that mental mode of saying, I have to tell this person how incompetent they are, so whatever I end up giving, they're happy with. So instead of then creating an environment which is positive, which is, oh, let's all get together and do more, it's an environment of, you're all crap and you all do terrible.
So you set up a baseline there to say...
And if I'm giving you anything at all,
then
that's
it's like
my
I'm doing a
generosity.
favor. I think one of the things that performance review systems have tried to achieve is that they've tried to remove the subjectivity, but they failed to do that because ultimately it is a subjective conversation. So do you think like the world of, the system of OKRs, now OKRs have been around for about 2 decades now, and almost every other company kind of, at least in the tech space, uses OKRs. Do you think OKRs have done their job in making performance reviews more objective, or have they made it a bit more complex?
I think they've just complexified.
Okay.
Because like you said, this is something that, again, one of my managers had said a really long time ago, which is that you have to understand that the process is, like you said, inherently subjective. The more you accept that, the more you will be able to work within its limitations. The more you try to get down to the minutest level of specificity, the harder will it be for you to drive strong performance in the organization.
Right. It's not really objective at the end of the day. It's still extremely, extremely subjective. So it brings me to the other part of subjectivity. Now that we've established subjectivity is core of performance review, context is king, as they say. So there is a context that every employee has to what they do. There's obviously a functional skill and there is a goal. Let's say it's decided by the OKR system or some other system. But every employee kind of operates in their own bubble of context, which is their personal context. It could be their context within the organization. And someone else may have, thrived despite all of this. So how do you bake in context into a performance review system?
Yeah, and I think there are 2 elements. I think one is context and one is inherent potential. Maybe that's the wrong word, but it's what you said, that 2 people in exactly the same circumstances. One of them is doing a lot more, not because they were given anything more, but they may be more resilient, maybe more willing to take risks, maybe more willing to try out new things. So I think there is that element of this, and because why I'm calling that out is because it's very closely connected to context, because context very frequently is what you're also able to absorb. But to your point, there is also the personal context of the individual.
Correct.
I have somebody who's not well in the family. I have mental health issues. You're not going to get punished for it because I understand
the context in which you are operating.
And I think it calls it both ways. Like, so the personal context ensures that you don't get penalized, and the potential context and what you do with it translates into that higher bar of performance. And I think there, what companies can definitely do is do more about defining what that looks like.
Right.
The archetype, the profile,
Yes.
the role modeling of what that behavior really looks like.
Right.
Can I think
Great.
help?
So you worked for very large organizations like Amazon, and you're now working for this very fast growth company called PhonePe. So performance review, does it have a place in fast growth companies? Because like we are a startup as well, so we talk about building the plane as we fly it and things like that, which are all the startup credos, right? So where does performance review really come there? Does it even exist?
So the way we thought about it was that, there was a time when there were like 30 people. At that point in time, it was saying, these are the founders. They are talking to you every day. They are telling you what they're trying to build. You're working with them to build it. And if it's not going, you're not doing what you're supposed to do, you get very quick feedback. Again, partly because of who you're working with and all of that, there is also a sense of, yes, I'm actually moving in the right direction. This is inspirational. This is engaging. I am creating something that's going to change the world. And I'm working with people who, I'm working with them only because I find them inspirational. Right. Otherwise, I would be working for Microsoft and earning a lot of money. In that 20 people, 30 people, 50 people environment, you don't need anything at all.
Correct.
But now we've kind of reached that stage where I think we've realized, some of the things we have to do, it'll take a year for that thing to build out. It might take 2 years for that thing to build out. So in that period, and then we are now some 5,000 odd people. Right. So there are going to be people through the organization who are going to communicate to you in terms of whether what you're doing is good or not. And I will not have results until much later. So in that sense, you go back to working on the inputs, working on how much of the way you've operated has been in line with what the organization is. And what is the quality of the work that you do? So if you're supposed to be working in project planning, what is the quality of tools, capabilities, systems, etc. that you're using, and how effectively are you able to use them? Whether it's translating into a successful project or not, maybe I'll know much later. But I can at least measure you on whether you are following what the requirements of the job are and the extent to which you're doing it.
True. So Loop works in the space of corporate healthcare, insurance and healthcare. And one thing that we find with most companies today is there's a greater emphasis on employee health, especially mental health. It's become it's become normalized now, talk about mental health. So how do you find health playing a role in a performance review system? Like, is it a dimension, is an employee's mental health or physical health a dimension that can be discussed, or even I wouldn't use the word measured, but at least track to say that, I may have a high performing employee, but if I find that the person is stressed or ruining their health, how do I bake that into the conversation that I have?
I think it's still fraught. What I find is that there are probably about 5% of people who are happy to talk about it. And in those cases, it's easy because then you say, okay, you have not been mentally at the top of your form. You might have had a physical problem, whatever. But I know there was a problem, and then we can factor that in. I think the bigger challenge for us is that most people are still not comfortable talking about it. They would still, in fact, I think just the level of self-awareness is not there. That I might, in fact, have a problem, and if I could get help, I would get better.
They may not be aware themselves.
And that, I think, is our bigger problem. And there you also get into difficult territory. Like, you do things to make some of these services available to people, but how do you get them to use them without interfering in their personal lives and their personal spaces?
So one thing we always do on Close the Loop is we allow our guest to close the loop finally on the topic being discussed. So what do you think, like, for our audience watching, an ideal performance review system for 2023, for the times that we live in?
I think the ideal one is continuous, and the ideal one somehow is able to connect the development, the evolution of the person from the compensation element of it. The moment we are able to do it, I think we will get to a place where most of the stress from the entire system sort of goes away.
That's great. So we look forward to that future. Hopefully it's in our immediate future. Thank you so much for being on Close the Loop.
Thank you so much, Srini. Great being here.